Good morning. My name is Lily Greer. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders both past and present. So as I've said, my name is Lily Greer, and I lost my mum, Tina Greer, to domestic violence at age 13. To give a quick overview, my mum was classified as a missing person for 10 years, as her body was and is still yet to be found. Until the age of 18, I received updates on my mum's case through media headlines. In this time, I fell off the radar, and I was a child of the state, quite literally forgotten about. 8 years after my mum's murder, I was finally put in touch with Queensland Victims Homicide Support Group. Despite all the evidence leading to my mum's partner, the QPS investigation was unsuccessful, and I'm still yet to receive an answer as to why. In 2022, the Coroner's Court accepted her partner, now deceased, murdered my mum 10 years prior. This meant I was now eligible for some of the support Victim Services provides. Despite never having a body, her case having many unresolved and suspicious circumstances, and clear missed opportunities that can and will prevent future deaths from occurring, the Coroner's Court deemed that an inquest was not in the public interest. To read this decision, after having my childhood taken away from me and the entirety of my adult life consumed by the loss of my mother, was devastating. My devastation quickly turned into rage after receiving correspondence from the Coroner's Court that blamed my mother for her murder and essentially stated things like she should have just left him. Thankfully, you can't argue with peer-reviewed research, the Domestic Violence Death Review Board, and government statistics. So, after 7 months of advocating, 22,789 petition signatures, and meeting with the Attorney General, an inquest was rightly granted. The journey so far has been a continuous battle between re-traumatisation and fighting for justice, where trauma-informed care is non-existent. It has been my responsibility to highlight the many injustices in my mum's case and advocate for its reopening, rather than the QPS or Coroner's Court. As it stands, the current supports available to victims are designed for them to fail. Therefore, to prevent future trauma and adverse impacts to victims of crime, I put forward the following recommendations to be considered. 1. Specialty services for children must be made available, such as a child support officer, who can discuss the case, answer any questions they may have, and provide updates and give much needed counselling. 2. In circumstances where an investigation or prosecution cannot be carried out by QPS, QPS is to provide an explanation to victims with legal backing as to why it was not possible. 3. The establishment of an external review board for homicide and missing persons related cases that is reviewed every 12 to 24 months until investigations close. This is to prevent missed opportunities and maintain QPS accountability, as opposed to relying on an inquest after the fact. 4. Mandated training and education of all Coroner's Court employees in areas of family and domestic violence. 5. Prior to the release of sensitive information, such as coronial reports, victims are to be contacted. During this contact or call, victims will be briefed about the nature of the information they will receive, their rights moving forward, supports available, and given the opportunity to ask any questions they may have. And finally, number 6, Victim Services is to create a special consideration category for victims and related victims who may be eligible under special circumstances, such as my case. That is all I have for you today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here.
Thank you, Lily, and thank you for your written submission. It's very comprehensive, and thank you for going to the trouble of giving us recommendations. It's very helpful for our deliberations. I'll now hand over to the Deputy Chair, who will have some questions for you, Lily.
Thanks, Lily. Thank you so much for taking the time to give us this written statement as well as your oral testimony today. It can't be easy to continue to put yourself out there like you do. Thank you very much for being a voice and for doing that for us. I think it will be very helpful for the committee in their process. I wanted to ask you, do you think one of the reasons why you received no support until it was determined that your mum's disappearance was perhaps in the criminal space, do you think that was because you weren't seen as a victim of crime?
It's a complicated topic because although she was classified as a missing person, it's been believed from the beginning that she was murdered. So I was technically not a victim of crime, but I am a victim of crime, and I have been a victim of crime for the last 11 years, but it wasn't legitimate until a coronial decision.
Yeah. And I can see from your written submission that you didn't receive any support until 2020. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. And then the support you received was through the Queensland Victims Homicide Support. Is that right?
Yes, they've been great.
Yeah. And so prior to 2020, during both the investigation phase and then the coronial, you having to advocate for a coronial inquest, do you think that you would have benefited from a victim support liaison officer or a victim support officer to be able to help you through that process?
Definitely. So once making contact with Queensland Victim Support Group, I have since had a peer support member and so much support from them. The meeting with the Attorney General wouldn't have been possible without Brett. However, obviously when I needed the most support would have been as a 13-year-old child, because things got tough there for a long time. Thankfully, they're okay now, but that time was crucial. And I can imagine many children that are victims of crime don't come out on the other side.
Thanks, Lily.
Thank you. Sandy?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Lily. And can I just say what an incredible young woman you are, what you've put in your submission, but what you've gone through, and that you went through that without support for so many years is quite heartbreaking. It really is. In your submission, you spoke about the need for a child support officer. From previous witnesses over, many hearings, we've heard about the importance. What's needed is a one-stop shop, but that one-stop shop can be a person. Is that very much similar to when you say a child support officer? It is someone that from the perpetration of the crime all the way through, find out everything that's needed, where to refer to, where, when there's progress to find from the DPP, and to be able to relay that back. Is that basically something similar, but very much that understands that often the needs of a child are very different to that of an adult victim?
That's correct. Depending on the age, essentially what I'd love to see is each child have a case manager and someone to look after them throughout that journey. Obviously, the level of which things are discussed changes. It's of my belief that I was never really told about anything because it was believed that I couldn't handle it, but that actually had a more detrimental impact to my mental health.
And when the homicide support group, once you finally got that support in 2020, was there anything from that point that, if, for example, if that was back at the time that you were able to access that support, is there anything that you would change, that you would recommend that would, and I know it's difficult to look back at as a 13-year-old, but if you had that support, what could have been added besides a case manager? Is there you know, in the process, I mean, it is so all-encompassing. And to go back in time, but is there anything that you would say this is what you would also add?
Well, ideally, there would be the peer support model, maybe potentially older children. I know that's a lot to take on for an older child, potentially maybe a young adult that's just turned 18 and has the mental capacity to do such a thing, because peer support is amazing and I've benefited greatly from that. But also just acknowledging, I know that I think it's called Grace's Place, has just opened here in Sydney, and it's for victims of homicide. So I'm not sure if that exists in Queensland as of yet, but just some sort of group space where children can be around each other that have experienced crime, because it's one of the most isolating things, and you don't meet many people until you find these support groups that have been through similar experiences.
And last question, how did you get through from being, you know, literally getting no support and all those years? Was it family? Was it, you know, how did you get through?
Through a variety of, at the beginning, unhealthy coping mechanisms, to now, which I have healthy support and coping mechanisms, and obviously peer support from other victims. I don't know. In the beginning, I think I got through because I had hoped she was alive, and it became quickly apparent that she wasn't. But because it's just been a missing person case, it was a missing person case for 10 years, there was, you know, that 1% chance that maybe she's alive. So that did get me through for a long time.
Thank you. And again, I just think you're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Jonty or Jason?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I'll jump in. Lily, thank you so much. I'll echo Sandy's views that, you know, you're a remarkable young woman, and thank you so much for writing to us and then coming. I know that can be really daunting to present to all of us, but I think we've all got so much from your submission this morning. And I think the recommendations you make, you know, are really sensible, and they make a lot of sense to me. I do have a couple of things outstanding in my mind, just so I can help formulate the thinking and what we might end up writing in a report. So I've got a couple of questions to put to you, and I don't want you to feel like you've got to answer them. If you'd rather not answer them, just say, I'd rather not answer that. And if I say anything or present something in a way that's offensive, I'm really sorry. I'm just going to say the questions, and I hope I don't cause any more distress to you in doing that. I'm just trying to understand the series of events of what happened. Obviously, your mother was missing, declared a missing person. It sounds like you went into the care of the state at that time.
Essentially, I've been a child of the state since a young age, but I got moved from living with the person I was staying with. I stayed with them for a while, and then I went to various family members, but technically the state owned me until I was 18.
Was anyone taking responsibility on behalf of the state for updating you on your mother's, on any investigation or where she may be, or any kind of developments in that case?
No.
And I heard you say was you were kind of discovering things through the media, perhaps more so than through family or through any kind of caseworker.
Yes. So as you probably know, most families respond to trauma quite differently. And my family kind of shuts down, and we didn't have a particularly close relationship. And it's a lot of men older, that doesn't necessarily open the floor for discussion. So putting the onus on families that are going through an impactful crime to, you know, update their children is not something that's realistic. So, yeah, I just literally found out everything from the news and Googled it. So
I can see how you fell through those cracks and shouldn't have, and I'm sorry that happened to you. It then sounds like you wanted to get a coronial inquest up and it wasn't approved, but you've lobbied, and have they now agreed to hold the inquest?
They have. It was a long period of time and pretty much my full-time job. But thankfully, as I said before, it's very obvious. There was many missed opportunities, and it's you can't argue with facts. So thankfully, there will be an inquest.
And you mentioned as well some correspondence you received at some point from the coroner's office, and you've got some excerpts in your submission around the victim blaming. Is it possible, do you have a copy of that, and can we receive a copy of that original correspondence, or do you no longer have that?
I do have it. I thought I had submitted it, and then I realised I hadn't. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think you've submitted something. I can see you've got
the wrong one.
Yeah. No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I was frantically looking through going, what have I missed? But yeah, if you've got that so we can see that in its original form, would be helpful, because that's certainly the theme that's coming through in these hearings, is some of the communication, whether it's on the phone, in person or in writing, might be technical and written in kind of public service jargon, but doesn't recognise that it's actually having an impact on the person reading it.
Also, it's very clear that there is no education on domestic and family violence in the coroner's court. Once you read it, you'll be able to see that, for instance, this death could not be prevented. We know from research that early intervention domestic violence deaths are able to be prevented. Just simple things that everyone is aware of, just plainly stated as fact, was very distressing and frustrating to read.
Yeah, thank you. And the coroner's, it's an interesting area. Is there someone, like obviously in the Department of Public Prosecutions, there's a victim liaison officer that's dedicated for working with victims. Was there anyone like that in coroners that was working with you to help convey the process a bit, or?
No. So because this is the person is not alive, it's not a criminal investigation anymore. It's just kind of about finding the facts. I did ask for one a couple of months ago, and they said because it's not criminal, it doesn't happen.
But somewhere, did you say somewhere that there was strong evidence to suggest that it was a homicide? Was that police or someone had accepted? Yep.
Sorry.
No,
it has been accepted by the coroner's court that it is a homicide. They just cannot find the body. And unfortunately, not much investigative work was done prior to the main suspect's death, which was 6 years post her going missing and her murder. But yes, the coroner's court firmly believes that he murdered her.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That helps me understand. And so now with that kind of finding from coroners, can you take that back to Victim Assist for that financial assistance application?
So they acknowledged the crime did happen, but I'm not eligible for related victims that say lived, like I was in the guardianship of my mother. I'm not currently eligible because I need to get access to, I need to become an executor, and she was 32 when she was murdered. So it's very difficult for children. It's much easier for parents to go through and, get things like birth certificates. And I imagine many people that have family members missing go through similar situations as myself. But I am not able to prove financially that she was my mum. So I can't get the secondary help.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does. It does actually.
Lily, just in relation to the fact that your mum was missing, was there anyone in the Queensland Police Service who you could liaise with? Like, my understanding, there is a missing persons section. Was there a person there that there wasn't? No. So until 2020, it was a homicide investigation. So for that 2 years, I was, so it's this case is very strange because it falls between homicide and missing persons. But I essentially, from the age of 19, 20, had contact with a detective at homicide. Okay. And then no one from missing persons, is that correct? No, since then I've found other families and organisations such as MIST, previously known as MPEN, that helps families. But that's 11 years after the fact. Okay. I understand Laura has a question.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to clarify too, just before I ask my question, when you were talking before about being a ward of the state, I realised that you're living in New South Wales now, but were you a ward of Queensland or was it New South Wales? It was Queensland, yeah.
Queensland.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify that. And I just wanted to go back to the financial. So one of the part of the terms of reference for this inquiry is to look at how victims of crime can be, look at how the Financial Assistance Act is treating victims of crime. And I mean, I just wanted to see if I could unpack a bit more. You said that you're not eligible for any of the financial assistance under the Victims of Crime Assistance Act because you're required to prove that you're actually your mother's daughter and you don't have the birth certificate to prove that. Can you just explain a bit more the barriers that you faced under the Victims of Crime Assistance Act?
So because she initially not eligible, I was never eligible until I got that coroner's report and the death certificate that then allowed me to become eligible. So then I got the recognition of crime payment. However, it's very complicated because you actually need to prove that the person who was murdered or the crime happened to was financially responsible for you. So I received a letter from Child Services stating that my mother was my carer, and I thought maybe that would be enough. And they rejected it and said that I need bank statements or, Medicare things or Centrelink things, which you can't get unless you're an executor, but she didn't have a will. So it's just kind of this round and round in circles mission that, as I said, a lot
Lily,
of families face.
And how did that impact on you, Lily? How did that? So having all that red tape and all that bureaucracy and being knocked back and having to prove that your mother was responsible for you, essentially. Can you tell the committee how that impacted on you?
It's very time consuming. So I can imagine a lot of people, because it's a significant help, right? So it's kind of trying to decipher, is this worth the emotional stress for the help? And I kind of look at it every 6 months, give it some time, and then take a break because, you don't really get far. And
Lily, sorry to interrupt, but do you have the last piece of correspondence that you got from the department?
yes, and I had suggested to them, how do other people usually go about this situation? Because this is what I'm experiencing.
It is. Lily, are you able to forward the last piece of correspondence that you got from, what do they call themselves, Victims Assist to the committee?
Yes.
Is there anything in that letter that you don't want to reveal? Like, is there anything that you want to keep confidential, or are you happy to provide it? Thank you, Lily. We've got about 1 minute left, so I'll open it up. Sandy, do you have a question before we close?
Yeah, no further questions. Thank you.
All right. In that case, thank you, Lily. It's been very informative, and I really am thankful for your written submission, which is very distinct, and also the fact that you've gone to the trouble of thinking about what recommendations the committee should be suggesting. It's very helpful to our deliberations. Good luck, and can you remember to send that information through to the Secretariat? You have their details, don't you, Lily?
Yes, I can get them.
All right.
One last thing is
Yes,
I would
Lily.
really love to reiterate the importance of education on domestic violence for the coronial services. I
Yes.
think it's most pertinent.
No, Lily, that came through loud and clear.
did a good job.
And it's very,
Thank you.
very relevant to our whole investigation. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Well done.